Richard, have you made your unregistered suppressor yet? We're the Armed Attorneys, and today we're talking about 2021's House Bill 957 here in the state of Texas, the Made in Texas Suppressor Law. Before we get rolling, please show your support for the Second Amendment by liking this video. 2021 was an interesting year. We have this bill that I think has caused a lot of talk and a lot of buzz in the gun community, which is the Made in Texas Suppressor Law. Richard, do you want to kind of get us rolling by talking about what House Bill 957 actually did?
Yeah, on its face, it looks like we're kind of saying, hey, federal government, back off. We are going to be making suppressors here in the state of Texas made wholly of components originating in the state of Texas from Texas materials. Maybe we use some insignificant parts here and there, but at the end of the day, you know, they tried to legislate their way out of the Commerce Clause and saying, if this is wholly made in the state of Texas, it's going to stay in the state of Texas, then we are not going to subject ourselves to the National Firearms Act, the NFA, and therefore we wouldn't need to register these suppressors under federal law, essentially is what the bill is saying. But there's a little bit more to it. Do you want to talk about that?
So let's even take a step back from there. I think we need to just mention what the National Firearm Act is, even though most people watching this are probably already familiar. This is one of our oldest pieces of gun law in the United States, if not the oldest on the federal level, legislating a federal tax and registration requirement for certain weapons. Suppressors are one. We've also got fully automatic weapons, machine guns, short barrel shotguns, short barrel rifles, amongst other items. But why can the federal government do this to us? Well, in part, they use really the biggest tool that Congress has in its tool bag, which is the Commerce Clause. The Commerce Clause allows the government to regulate anything that passes through interstate commerce. And, you know, anyone who's looked into case law on this knows that's pretty much everything. There is almost nothing that doesn't have some effect on interstate commerce, that doesn't flow through interstate commerce, and even things you wouldn't think. There's case law that says, gosh, that little plot of land where you're growing wheat just within your own state, even that has an effect on interstate commerce. So it really allows the federal government to regulate basically everything. That's the point of the Made in Texas suppressors, is essentially the state of Texas is trying to say there is no part of this that touches interstate commerce. So federal government, you can't regulate it. The National Firearms Act doesn't apply. We don't need tax stamps. We don't need registration. But Richard, what do we know about that strategy?
It's probably a losing argument. People have come before us who've kind of proven that point, but there may be a little twist when it comes to Texas. So we've seen a similar Made in Texas law appear in the state of Kansas and the state of Montana. In Kansas, I believe there are people currently sitting in federal prison as of the recording of this video who made their Made in Kansas suppressors. Montana was a little bit better because they added some additional steps to seek out, you know, basically permission. It's called a declaratory judgment. But they didn't really go far enough in Montana because declaratory judgment is basically like getting pre-authorization. The Montana law said, hey, you know, if you seek a declaratory judgment in a federal court and a federal judge gives you the okay, then you could make your, you know, essentially your homemade suppressors without registration. And what they did in Montana, though, is where they had kind of a slip up is they argued on Commerce Clause grounds only, just like Emily talked about. And the judge wasn't too happy about that.
Yeah. And, you know, the Texas law is actually pretty close to identical to the Montana law. You petition the Attorney General here in Texas, you express your intention to make your own suppressors, then the Attorney General has to file. I mean, Ken Paxton works for us now.
Right.
He has to file this lawsuit on your behalf with the federal government, seeking this declaratory judgment, basically in advance before you wind up in federal prison like the guys in Kansas, the okay from the federal government. But yes, in Montana, they only challenged on Commerce Clause grounds. And actually, the federal appeals court says we don't know what the result would have been had you argued on Second Amendment grounds. If you had said, look, this kind of regulation is a violation of the Second Amendment itself. And that's what makes this case really interesting in Texas, or these future cases really interesting, because although Montana is in a circuit that's a little bit more, I guess, midline, we here in Texas are in the Fifth Circuit, and that's a very conservative circuit. It tends to be very pro-gun. We might have a really good shot at this, although you can never predict what any judge will do. And then, of course, whether or not the Supreme Court would take up this matter, even if the federal Fifth Circuit agreed that Texas had the right to do this. It's all very much up in the air and something we won't see for years down the road. So, I mean, what does that mean for people right now wanting to make their own suppressors?
Yeah, the bottom line is Ken Paxton should take a lesson from Montana and argue this on Second Amendment grounds. And then when it makes its way through the courts and we see a court issuing a declaratory judgment, that's the key thing we need to see before anyone, breaks out the suppressor making equipment here in Texas. You need to follow the legal channels that exist. Request your intent, or submit your intent to make a suppressor with Ken Paxton. Let it work its way through the courts. Get that declaratory judgment from a federal court before you start thinking about making an unregistered National Firearms Act item. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, if you just went and created a suppressor in your garage, you'd be committing a very serious federal felony. So there's a channel and a path towards completing it legally, but for the time being, don't do it. If you want a suppressor for the time being, you need to get a tax stamp. Either you're purchasing an existing NFA item, you're purchasing a suppressor with a Form 4, or you're making your own with a Form 1. But until that takes
Form 1
place,
and an oil filter.
Yeah, exactly right. Before any of that, we make a made in Texas suppressor. You got to go through the legal process. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this content, consider subscribing and hit the like button, and join us in the fight against the anti-2A algorithm by sharing this video.
And please keep your questions and discussion going in the comment section below. And until next time, we're the Armed Attorneys.